the requirements for the project. They're available from the course website. Okay, so you'll need to create. One of the requirements is that you need several user roles. Okay, for instance, you might have a faculty and a student, right? A manager and an employee, right? A buyer and a seller. Okay, so you need at least 2 roles. Anonymous user does not count, right? An anonymous user does not count. So 2 roles. You need to support 2 specific roles: anonymous users, obviously, and an admin user. Okay, and the challenge here is that all 4 users will have distinct user interfaces. Okay, some of the user interfaces aspects will overlap. Okay, but some users will have distinct access to certain parts of the application that are only accessible through that particular role. Yes. Okay. So, for instance, on an online store, you might have a seller and a buyer. In a project management domain, you might have a developers, quality assurance, project managers, business analysts, each one with its own user interface. Right? That's where the challenge lies. Right? You know, I'm going to show these things to this particular user, but not this other user type of user. Okay. For online restaurant, you might have cooks, waiters. Sports, you might have players, coaches, directors, spectators, fans. Okay. The navigation, the user interface should adapt, right, depending on the role. The admin role requirement is, so somebody needs to have an admin role, right, and they should have a dedicated portion of the application that is only accessible as the admin role. Right? They should be allowed to, at a minimum, be able to manage other users, right? Create users, remove users, update users. Okay. They should provide the various CRUD operations. CRUD stands for being able to create, read, update, and delete. Okay, users. Right. They should also allow the system administrator to manipulate the domain objects. Right. For instance, if somebody wrote an offending review, right? The admin should be able to remove that review. Okay, right? Be able to, so you should also provide operations that manipulate the domain objects. Okay. Now the user interface for admins. Okay, it is okay for an admin user interface to be a little more just functional, right? As opposed to an end user like a faculty or student or buyer or seller, right? They only have access to a subset of the data set, right? The database has all the data, and a particular end user only has access to their particular information and anything that is associated to their particular identity. They don't have access to everything. They don't have access to all the users. They don't have access to all the products. But as an admin, I do. I have access to everything. Okay, so the user interfaces should be fairly distinct. It is okay for an admin user to have lots and lots of tables, right? A lot of tabular data. Right? Whereas as an end user, that might not be appropriate, right? To just have tables and tables, right? Okay, so your end user, the user interface should be tailored to your particular audience. All right. Okay. An anonymous user, you should support anonymous user, meaning don't force the user to log in. Right. They should be able to use most of your application up until the point where you need to know who the person is, and then you can force them to log in. Okay. End user roles. What I mean by end user roles is not the admin user. Not the anonymous user, everybody else. Somebody who's logged in, we know who you are, right? And depending on your role, we treat you differently, right? Okay. They should be allowed to manipulate their particular private information, their personal information, and be able to manipulate any different domain objects, right? And the domain objects that they can manipulate depends on their role. right? So for instance, if you're a seller, right, you can create stores, right, and then you can add different products to your store, right? You can and then you can change prices of those products. You can change descriptions. You can add pictures. You can do a lot of things about those products. Yes, and so you have a particular relationship with those products, as opposed to a buyer, right, who can only search for those products, right? And they can purchase those products. They can add them to a wish list. They can put them in a shopping cart. They can have completely different types of relationships with the same products. Make sense? All right. So as a buyer, I can't create products. I can read products. I can't update products, but maybe I can remove them from a shopping list. Make sense? So, but as a seller, I can create products. I can remove products. I can update products. Make sense? Right? So the CRUD operations are not always accessible to all types of users. Yes? Right? Perhaps the read operation is only accessible to, well, read operations are accessible to everybody. Everybody can read a product, right? But not everybody can create a product. Not everybody could update or delete a product. Make sense? Okay. Requirements, depending on whether you are an undergrad or a graduate, we're going to make it a little bit easier for the undergrads. Okay. For them, they'd have to support the admin role, the anonymous role, and at least one role. Okay, if you're a graduate, you need to support at least an additional role. Okay, and this depends on the size of your team. Right, you can form teams. Right, at most 3 students per team. Okay. Okay, three students per team, right? But the bigger your team, we'll make it proportionally harder for you. Okay, so for instance, if you have a 2-person team, then we're going to have, if you're an undergrad, you're going to have an additional role that you need to support, right? And that adds complexity, right? It adds you need to provide a specific user interface for that particular role, right? Additional relationships. Right, with different domain objects. If you are a graduate and you have a 2-person team, you have to have at least 3 roles, role 1, 2, and 3. So basically, an additional role, right, for the size of your team. Make sense? Okay. I'm not sure I wrote it here, but oftentimes, teams come back to me saying, "I can't think of a role. I can't think of a role," right? And one thing that you can do is you can swap a role for an API. Okay, we already looked at the cloud API, right? That you can fetch data from the cloud. Yes. If you could use more than one API, right? For instance, you can use Best Buy and Amazon, right? Or Best Buy, Amazon, and eBay. Right, they all have their own distinct APIs, right, to interact with. Right? So it's a fair trade to use an additional API for a role. Right? So if you can't think of a role, you can swap it for an additional API. I think that's a fair trade. Okay. Required data model. You'll need a collection to store the user information. You'll need to store data about domain objects, right? In the user data model, you need to store your things such as username, password, date of birth, first name, last names, phones, addresses, email, and so on, right? For the domain object, well, it depends what your object is, right? If it's a movie, you'll need to store maybe the title, the rating, maybe the ID of that movie, right? Back on IMDb or whatever it is. If it's a song, then whatever ID you get it from SoundCloud or Spotify or whatever API you're using, right? Maybe the title of that song, maybe the album cover, perhaps, right? Again, it depends on your data on the domain you choose. Okay. You need to cover support a user-to-user relationship, right? Whether somebody's following somebody or somebody's sending messages to someone else, or maybe there's a manager-to-employee relationship, okay? Right? You also need a user-to-domain object relationship, right? A user wrote a comment or a review about a particular object, right? About a particular recipe. Also, domain-to-domain relationship, right? So some objects are made up of other objects, right? A playlist contains many songs, right? A wish list contains many products. Yes, right? Where you have a what we call a one-to-many relationship. A one-to-many relationship, meaning one playlist is related to many songs. One wish list can contain many products. We refer to that as a one-to-many relationship. Okay? Or it might be a many-to-many relationship also. You need to support that as well, where maybe one movie has reviews from lots of people. Right? So one movie has reviews from many users, but one user can review many movies. That is referred to as a many-to-many relationship. Yes? One movie can be related to many users, but one user can be related to many different movies. Make sense? Actors also are related to many different movies. Right? One actor can act in many movies, but one movie can have many actors. Right? Many-to-many. So you have to support a many-to-many relationship. Okay? Make sense? I think these requirements are wide enough and generic enough that they should support, quite a bit of different types of projects, right? But again, yours might fall out of these boundaries. Please see me if indeed if this is the case. Here's a very generic UML class diagram. Who's familiar with UML? Or about a little bit more than half the class. Yeah, so UML diagrams, class diagrams, allow you to formally capture, right, what are the various data models, right? What are the various pieces of data that you want to capture, right? So here, this is a very generic UML class diagram. You have here different types of users that are related to one another, right? There's an association between two types of users, or a user can have a hierarchical relationship with other users. This captures hierarchies where you might have a user has a manager, and that manager might have another manager, right? And you can have a hierarchy of these things, right? A recursive hierarchy. They could have a relationship with a domain object, and a domain object can have many domain objects associated with them, right? Or you can have an association between two domain objects, or a self-referencing relationship between the two. Okay? This kind of captures everything. Not everything is required. Here are some samples of what some of these might look like. Come on. So here you might have a buyer and a seller that might be sending messages between them, right? And a buyer can follow another buyer. And a buyer can create reviews of products, and products can be hierarchically related to one another in a hierarchy, right? A tree of products, right? Where you have categories, subcategories, subcategories, and then the leaves of the products are the actual physical products. Yes, right. So this kind of relationship allows you to capture those hierarchies. A seller can create many stores. Right, and a store can contain many products, right? That's what the diamond captures here, a one-to-many relationship, right? Messages are a many-to-many relationship between a buyer and a seller. One buyer can send many messages to a seller, but a seller can receive many messages from different buyers. Here you have a many-to-many relationship between a buyer and a product, right? A buyer can review many products, but a product can be reviewed by many buyers. Yes? Right, I'll be asking for you to create such diagrams, right, all throughout the semester. Okay, here's another one. You have a student sending messages to a faculty. A faculty can author many courses, but a course can be authored by many faculty. A faculty can teach many sections, but a section can be taught by many faculty. right? A student can be enrolled in different sections, but a section can have many students enrolled in the same section, right? So there's several many-to-many relationships there. A section, a particular course can have many sections, right? So I'll ask you to capture these kinds of UML diagrams, right, as part of the design phase of your project. Yes? Okay. Feature requirement, we'll need a home page, right? We talked about that. You'll need to have support login and registration by either plain old username and password, and one additional authority such as Google or Facebook or Twitter. You can choose which one. You'll need a profile page, right, where a user can change their personal information or someone else can view somebody else's profile. You should be able to search some third-party API and view those search results. And then a details page that shows the details of a particular object. Some social networking features, such as being able to follow someone or bookmark somebody or navigate to somebody's profile and leave a message there. And also some interact with third-party APIs. This is a great website that allows you to search for these cloud APIs that I'm talking about, right? If you think of a particular idea, you type in here. Maybe you want to do something about weather, and you can search, and it comes back with various APIs, 241 APIs. Weather.com is here, Weather Channels is here, Yahoo Weather is here. If you want business or stock information, you can put their stock or something, right? It'll come back with, Bloomberg. It will come back with, Yahoo Finance, and those are APIs that you can interact with, right? So this is a great resource. There's tons. If you can't find it here, you can just search, whatever idea you have, space API. Yes. And I strongly encourage you to do that, start that today, okay? It's a very short semester. There's very little wiggle room on whether you're going to do one thing or another. I don't want you, 3 weeks from now, realizing that you don't want to do that first idea that you had and having to switch. Again, 3 weeks is a very long time in a very short semester, okay? So ideally, you start searching your idea right now. What else? Styling requirements. We're going to go over this, but all your application should be responsive, meaning it should be friendly to a small screen, right, as well as a large screen, right. So it should be viewable on a smaller phone or a tablet or on a desktop. So definitely responsive. Make sure that as you're implementing these things, you're always checking what it looks like as you resize your browser. Okay, don't only look at it in a very tiny screen or a very large screen. It should behave well at all size screens. Okay, it should be responsive. You're gonna need to use a styling library like Bootstrap or Materials or Foundation. You can use those. You cannot use a pre-packaged website that already has all the styling for you. You can use these libraries that come with pre-packaged with some widgets. These are developer-friendly libraries that allow you to create widgets yourself, from scratch, right, and make it look pretty from the beginning. White spacing, make sure that you have nice, all around borders and that it's not flush with the surrounding window. The things are spaced out that looks nice to the eye. And things are nicely and aligned. They use good use of paddings and margins and justification. And the look and feel should, in general, look professional, like a completed product. Okay. Also, there's going to be several best practices that we're going to go over in class, and throughout the assignment, we're going to assume that you're going to be applying those same practices for your project. Okay, you're going to be graded on those things. So and we're certainly going to have plenty of chance to practice these things here in class and in your assignment, right? And that you're going to go and continue that on your project. Each week, except the first week, you're going to be keep track of your progress as a wiki, right? In your GitHub, right? You're going to keep track of your progress by creating a new wiki entry every week. Okay. The first week, which is not this week, the following week, you'll make an entry just telling us your idea of what it is that you want to build. Okay. And write about who would be your users, types of users, right? Who would be your domain objects? What would they be? It's going to be my recipes made up of several ingredients. It's going to be my sports team made up of all these team members. It's going to be it'll be a university or school with these courses and sections and whatnot. So explain to us what are the domain objects and whatnot. Yes. Then you'll come up with a UML class diagram description of your data model. Right. The second week, that's 3 weeks from now, or 2 weeks from now. You'll create a little proof of concept of a very of you having implemented a small scale test of if you can interact with the APIs. That's going to be the hardest part, right? Interacting with the API. Right? Whatever API you choose, I want you to make sure that you are aware of whatever limitations that API gives you. Okay? You want to identify those as early as possible, right? Because your idea, you might be, whatever idea you might have at first, the API might not support all the ideas that you might have. Okay? And it is okay to scale back your project to, around whatever the API actually allows you to do. It is okay to refactor and change your expectations around the API. You can't change the API. The API is whatever they give you. Right? So if the API doesn't support a particular feature, it's okay to refactor your expectations. Okay. And then project 4, you'll create a prototype, right, of being able to have a profile page and actually bookmark some things, right, and create those relationships between a user and some of these objects. So that's project 4, and the last one will be actually implementing this. Right. So ideally, you make progress every week. Right. You're not going to leave this to the very end, and this is only for yourself to pace yourself where you should be. Right. At each of these stages, it's kind of milestones of to measure how much progress you have made. Okay. And also to show us that. That you've been working on this, for the last several weeks. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. All right.